Welcome to the Reprobates podcast, presented by Darkroom Horror. This is a show about living in the 21st century as an enemy of God. I'm your host, Josh Hyde. Welcome to hell. In this first episode, I'll be sharing an interview I did in 2020 with Mitch Horowitz for his book release, The Miracle Habits. During this interview, we discussed the necessity of a definite chief aim, opposition as a motivational force, the importance of a personal spiritual journey, and parenting by example. If you don't know him already, Mitch Horowitz is a historian of alternative spirituality and one of today's most literate voices of esoterica, mysticism, and the occult. This man has had a tremendous impact on my own spiritual journey and mentality. He's had his hand on more books than I can count, from the G&D Media Condensed Classics Library, his personal works like Occult America, The Miracle Club, Daydream Believer, Uncertain Places, Modern Occultism, and so many more. Here is Mitch Horowitz.
Biggest thing, I want to start on point one. I mean, this is kind of where this is the reason that I know about you. It comes down to that DCA, the definite chief aim.
Yeah.
And habit one is unwavering focus. Holding to one core aim with absolute passion and singularity will revolutionize your life. This is life's toughest but most magical bargain. It requires hard decision and great labor. The payoff is extraordinary. This is how I found you. I was going through like Bob Proctor, Napoleon Hill, like just all these guys. And you ended up narrating some of the books. And it had mentioned like your little tagline at the end of it saying, this is Mitch Horowitz. I did Occult America. And immediately like that kind of clicked for me. Like I need to look into this guy. So that's what sprang all of that a couple of years ago. But since then, in regards to the definite chief aim, I've spoken with so many people who are just so exhausted from life in general that the idea of pursuing something like even finding out what that chief aim is, like just seems unattainable.
Yes.
What do you say to those people?
Well, there's two different ways to look at it. You know, I think first of all, focus brings power. It's a law of nature. It's a law of our psyches. And I don't say that lightly. You know, too frequently, people who fashion themselves as life coaches or motivational gurus will just rattle off these little homilies, and I never want to hear myself doing that. My life experience has been that when you are really able to reduce what you want in life to one definite, definable point, it's very powerful because it not only concentrates your energies, but it excludes other things as well. You know, one of the reasons that people resist selecting a definite aim is because they feel it unrealistically limits them or narrows their life. I mean, we're all different things. We're caregivers, we're parents, we're workers, we're artists. We have many, many roles that we play in life, all of which have a legitimate claim on us. But my contention is that one really well-chosen aim can cover a lot of different bases. The truth is, though, it may not cover all the bases. There may be certain things that get excluded. So it's not like it's just this peaches and cream idea that you select an aim and it becomes this wonderful kind of springboard to what you want. It does mean that your life becomes more narrow in some ways as well. It's a tough bargain. And I also sympathize with people who feel that life is so demanding that it is hard for them to imagine naming one more thing that they have to search for or work towards. And my message would be, at least just know what it is. You know, sometimes we don't have to act on something immediately. And quite frankly, something might not even be possible, or it might not be possible in the way or from the mind's eye perspective that we have. But it's a tragedy not to know what it is, because I think that I really do part ways with people who claim that life is just about the journey and meaning and gratitude. I mean, all that sounds lovely, and I'm not disparaging it if it's promulgated in a way that's really thoughtful. But we have things that we wish for in life, and I think it's a terrible tragedy not to at least acknowledge to ourselves what those are or what that one primary thing is. So I would say at least just start from that point, just knowing what your wish is, and really being blunt about it, you know.
It makes a lot of sense. How important is it to be specific about that aim?
I do think one should be specific. You know, I don't think you have to be specific to the point of excluding the possibilities that what you want could come from unexpected channels. But, you know, I think that if an individual wants to do, you know, some very specific thing, you know, if it's being a musician, or if it's rising up through the ranks in the martial arts, or if it's becoming an officer in the military, or whatever it is, I do think it behooves you to be specific.
I can think of a minimum of 6 people that I've spoken specifically about this topic with, all of whom suffer from depression and anxiety in very real ways. And I don't know if that's like a common thread amongst people who are unable to find it. Even in your book, which one was it? Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim.
Yeah.
You spoke about people who came to you and who said, hey, I don't have any idea what that looks like. And you offered and said, let's find it together.
Yeah.
And people just never got back.
Yeah, I don't always have time to do that today. You know, I try to get back to anybody who writes to me. And I definitely have spent time with people, including strangers, you know, who have written to me. I don't quite have as much time to do that now, but I value that contact because I want to hear from people. And I only request brevity, but, you know, I do want to hear from people, and I do make every effort to get back to people, because I do feel that the stuff I'm talking about is either real or it's not. And I guess I have never really suffered from depression. I do suffer from anxiety. Anxiety is my poison. So I can sympathize with people who suffer from depression, because I know what it's like to feel some chronic nagging thing that's always at your back. And what's so difficult about depression and anxiety, I think, is that we're always driven to look for some cause. And there may be a cause, you know, a lack of personal power, I think, results in agony in a lot of people's lives in all kinds of different ways. But sometimes our bodies are just wired in a certain way. Our brain chemistry just runs in a certain way. And we almost punish ourselves into looking for causes when it's just, you know, to some degree, it's a call it what you will, you know, it's a hardwired, possibly biologically rooted fact of a person's life. I mean, I feel butterflies in my stomach, and I can catch myself sometimes and realize, whoa, you know, this is not because I'm worried about X, Y, or Z. It's because, unfortunately, it's how I'm wired, and it's difficult. At the same time, I do believe that striving towards personal victory, power, attainment, I think it's tonic. I think it helps people, and I really break with that wing of our spiritual culture that says that's missing the point, that's mistaking the outer for the real, that's mistaking the husk for the kernel, that's, you know, mistaking the finger pointing at the moon for the moon. I don't agree with that. I think we're beings who are built to aspire.
Yeah. I mean, there's a supernatural mentality, especially I think for people who may struggle with these things, that like once you get there, you'll be good, you'll be set. Which is a perfect segue into Habit 11, which talks about opposition being friendship.
And it's hard for people. It's hard for people. It's based on a William Blake quote, opposition is true friendship. And the only way we grow is through opposition. Otherwise, we would remain just very static or childish. I think of opposition, or the ability to kind of meet with and accommodate or move past resistance, as the only thing that's gotten me anywhere in life. And, you know, it's funny. We hear people tell us money doesn't make you happy, success doesn't make you happy. And of course, that always comes from people who either have neither money nor material success, or it comes from people who have money or material success in some way and who have spent their whole lives getting there. And then they want to tell the rest of us, you know, that they're Buddha, you know, sitting under the Bodhi tree now, you know, but I don't see them giving up that which they've attained. I can say from my own personal experience that I didn't publish my first books until I was over the age of 40. Had I never done that, I would have felt a terrible sense of emptiness. And I am somebody who wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning staring at the ceiling from time to time. It's not like I'm immune from any of the maladies and difficulties that any of us face in life. But having attained some part of what I wish for, I can say it is satisfying. I really, truly would never have been happy in life had I not broken through as a writer, had I not really made that effort, and made that effort not only in a sort of titular way, but really kind of pursued it, kept at it, broken through with it. I felt very incomplete, in my 30s, very, very incomplete. And that started to change as my career as a writer and an artist took shape.
So if that opposition is like kind of helping us and building us and pushing us forward, is opposition something that we should be looking for? Or does that just mean when opposition faces us, that we should do our best to kind of sit back and really take it all in and learn from it?
Well, there's so much opposition that just faces us naturally every day. None of us ever need to go look for it. I mean, it's just there as a constant, like air currents. I suppose what I'm saying is that in the midst of opposition, it can be easy to feel despair. And I've been there, and we all feel that. But it is important to realize that unless we meet with resistance, we will never grow. We will never get better. We will never vault beyond where we are now. I've had instances where, for example, my second book was a book called One Simple Idea, and that was a history of the positive mind movement. And I'm very proud of that book. I would even go so far as to say it's probably my favorite of any that I've written, because it really traced out history of some of the different pioneers of the positive mind movement. And they were radical, wonderful, extraordinary people in the late 19th century who created a vocabulary and a point of view that's very mainstream today, but was certainly not mainstream at that time. And they gave a lot of hope to a lot of people. They were also very socially progressive. They were radicals. They weren't kind of the corporatist model of like a positive mind or a motivational philosopher. I mean, they were really very radical figures, and included people like Marcus Garvey, the great black nationalist figure, Wallace D. Wattles, author of Science of Getting Rich, who was a socialist, and many, many other people besides. And I wrote a really detailed proposal for that book. I had had success with Occult America, and for a long time, nobody wanted to publish it. And it was really, really tough. And it was emotionally very, very difficult, because you say to yourself, wow, I mean, what do I have to do? I did this book. It was well received. It did well in the marketplace. And yet the idea just wasn't catching fire. And eventually it came together in a variety of ways. And the book has found its home across, different media, digital, print, audio, and it was very satisfying. And I had to go through that. I mean, I had to go through that. I suppose I had to develop the resilience of what it felt like to work on selling something for 9 months and feel like I was getting absolutely nowhere. And for a lot of people, 9 months is nothing. I mean, in the movie business, you can, that could be 9 years that you have to spend trying to sell a film. And of course, there's all kinds of different ways of bringing something to market or trying to accomplish something. I'm only speaking from book publishing because that's what I've been immersed in. But it was really tough. Nobody opened any doors for me. And I suppose it built a resilience in me that has been very sustaining, although during that time, it was also very, very difficult.
So kind of at this point now, you're able to handle that, not rejection, but that pressure a little bit better since you've gone through it?
I think I'm definitely more realistic about it. I am of the realization that sometimes you just have to sit with a project, whatever it may be, for a very, very long time before somebody says yes to you. I think I accept that more. I'm probably less likely to feel that a no, for example, is final. And I've learned that a no is not necessarily final. As a friend of mine puts it, conditions can change and the answer changes. I also always tell people, and it's so important to remember this when you're striving to get someplace, it only takes one yes. You just need that one yes and you're golden. And that could be true in terms of relationships, in terms of your art, your work, your whatever it is that you're aiming to do in life. It can cover so many different bases, but it takes only one yes. And persistence is so required in life. And I suppose that experience taught me persistence. So where would I have learned that if it weren't from opposition?
That makes a lot of sense. Well, if you don't mind, we're going to switch gears a little bit. I have a personal question for you.
Of course.
Where, if you don't mind my asking, where are you currently on your spiritual journey?
Wow, that's a heavy question. My spiritual journey is probably in a place right now where I'm asking myself how much in the way of ceremony, method, practice, artifice is even necessary. Like, if we accept the premise, as I do, that there is an extra physical element to our lives, that we do participate in a life that goes beyond strictly cognition, flesh and bone, motor skill, and that we capture glimpses of this, for example, in psychical research, in mind causality, in, I would argue, the placebo response, in neuroplasticity, maybe in different aspects of quantum theory. If we accept the truth of that premise, as I do for a whole variety of reasons, then to participate in that extra physical world, do we need certain conditions, or could it be available to us in a much more natural way? Is it actually available to us all the time, but we just don't realize it? Like, for example, are we constantly selecting things through perspective? And that's just going on all the time. And it requires awareness, but does it require some sort of special operation? So that's kind of where I am with my search. I also, I have been asking myself a very tough question recently. And that is, I grew up in a very traditional Jewish background here in the city of New York, where I live today. And I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah, and it was, a conservative Jewish background. Not much different ultimately from a conservative Christian background, in that your church or your synagogue is kind of a central place in your life. The holidays, the Sabbath, and so on take on like a central place. And you are taught to think of God as kind of, the man upstairs who gives you goodies if you're good and, smacks you down if you're bad. And I know that's a very conventional point of view. And today I've sort of upended that point of view because I have my own very individualized ideas about Satanism and things related to a kind of opposing or adversarial force. But it dawns on me, and it would be foolish if it didn't dawn on me, that to some extent, I am recreating the religion of my childhood, just with different reference points, symbols, vocabulary. And I'd be dishonest if I didn't acknowledge to myself that I am recreating the religion of my childhood. And that puts me in front of various questions. One of those questions is that necessarily wrong? Just because you grow up in a hierarchical kind of top-down Judeo-Christian background, and you export that perspective with you, as I feel I must admit I have done, is that wrong? I don't know that that's wrong, and if it is wrong, so be it. Then I'll be wrong and I'll experiment, and my experiments might lead me to some other insight or some other truth or some other possibility, or they might lead me to conclude, hey, that idea of life actually has some validity, even though I come at it in a very different way from the way, my Aunt Lois comes at it, And so I'm saying to myself, how am I recreating the structures of my youth? And is that a problem? And maybe it's not a problem. And if I'm incorrect, like let's say my assumptions are incorrect about how I relate to some invisible force, it might lead me to something else. So I'm trying to cast a light on how I have imported my childhood beliefs into my adulthood, whether that's a problem or not. And if it is a problem, insofar as it's just, perhaps illusory, maybe I'll find something else. So that's what I'm working with right now.
It makes sense. And you brought something up about individualism. How important do you think that is within a person's spiritual journey in general?
I think it's hugely important. And I really am in a very heavy state of mind right now where I'm very fed up with orthodoxy of any kind. And there's so much of it within the alternative mainstream world that we come from. We always think it's those other guys, and the truth is, you see it all over social media. Somebody will say, you can only know God if you do this, or you can only this, or, right. People will put labels on things, that's materialism. That's, being too outwardly focused. That's superficial. That's whatever. And I have a real problem with that because I feel that takes people's questions from them, that places limits on people. I think that sensitive men and women are capable of coming to terms with what they want in life without mediation. I don't like seeing somebody take a question from someone else. If someone says, I just want to be happy, okay? There's always some divine who will say to them, what do you mean by happiness? And I don't really like that line of engagement. Yeah. I think that person knows full well what he or she means by happiness. That person could teach me something about what he or she means by happiness, and I think a 12-year-old knows what he or she means by happiness. Obviously there are people among us who might be more finely attuned to their emotions than others. There might be people among us who more closely match my personal style and I might have more affinity with. But I think that we have to stop and take seriously that the individual knows something about what he or she wants. So I don't like any kind of orthodoxy that takes that from somebody, myself included.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny that you had mentioned that because a question that's been coming up for me a lot lately within my own circles and where I came from has to do with ethics and morality in regards to the spiritual journey and just life in general. But multiple times now I've been told from a very specific religion that their God is the only dictator of morality. What would your response be to something like that?
I would say that in terms of the human psyche, there is no such thing as good and evil. There's such thing as empathy and spite. Uh-huh. And the manner in which I treat another person is the determinant of where I fall on that scale. And if I believe in some kind of personal reciprocity, which I strongly do, some people might call that karma, then it behooves me to behave responsibly towards another person. My real only moral law is not doing anything so much as it's within my power to interrupt or disrupt another person's search for self-potential. And I simply don't understand any other operative law of ethics. It's really just about human reciprocity. Huh. Am I behaving with empathy toward another, or am I behaving with violence toward another? Good and evil, are just badges. I mean, it's absolutely meaningless. Show it to me. It's like ego and superego. What is that? Can I put my arms around that? But I can certainly demonstrate if someone is behaving violently, either emotionally or physically towards another person, and I have a problem with that, I can put my arms around that. But when people talk that way, they're just trying to redound to themselves a kind of badge of honor that they might not possess through their own behavior.
So that's something that I've struggled with a lot lately, particularly in I guess, allowing specific views to go on their own, specifically when they're, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, especially keeping mind of time.
Don't worry too much about time. If we go over, it's fine. And you could always be entirely blunt with me. So say whatever you like.
Yes, this is also going on the internet.
I know, right. It's just us.
Okay, so I think that I still very much have ingrained a savior mentality from my upbringing, you know?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of being able to let people exist and experiment and pursue things on their own. But then when you have constructs coming in saying, no, this is how to do it, is that this, can you speak against that? Like,
yeah.
Is it
I listen, you know, first of all, a religious idea or practical philosophy has to work in the life of the individual. And I think we should be very plain about that. I think we should be very direct about that. If an individual joins Alcoholics Anonymous, let's say, and their conception of a higher power is the Judeo-Christian God, or is, you know, Buddha or Allah or higher mind or whatever, and they have success, they're able to stay clean, they're able to stay sober, well, you know, that person's conduct stands testament to the practicality of their outlook. But how could I dictate an outlook to them, or they dictate an outlook to me? You know, I mean, I hear, for example, an atheist might say, a dyed-in-the-wool atheist might say, you know, the problem with you spiritual people is you suffer from delusion. And my response to that is, delusion is only measurable through conduct. What other empiricism would you use? Otherwise, it's just debating which flavor of ice cream you like. Am I good because I like chocolate, and, you know, my neighbor Mike is bad because he likes vanilla? It just so happens I don't like vanilla. It's silly. You know, it's just absolutely silly. What other empiricism would you use than conduct when dealing with ethical or spiritual philosophies? So if a non-believer says to me, you know, you're delusive, I would say again, you know, show that to me. You know, show that to me. Am I engaging in some disastrous, depleting behavior? Am I hurting people? Is there something wrong with my relationships? Is, you know, what is the, you have to show me the conduct. So, you know, people can say whatever they want, and none of us know where any of us are going. You know, none of us can prove the presence of hell or heaven or purgatory or anything else. I mean, one of the reasons I suppose ESP research is so important to me is because if one talks in terms of statistics, it provides us with concrete evidence, I would even say proof, of there being an anomalous transfer of information in laboratory settings. That points to an extra physical dimension of life, which is hugely tantalizing to me. That doesn't tell me anything about what happens after these bodies decay, after we die. I assume that there's something endures, but the very fact of non-local intelligence doesn't tell me that. So, and look, you know, I mean, people grow up in different life situations that place tremendous imprimaturs on them. You know, like, I like to think of myself as this very freewheeling spiritual experimenter, but as I was saying earlier, I can always see the framework of my childhood religious beliefs in the present. And again, I don't know that that's a bad thing. The only thing I don't want is for a religious framework, whether it's past or present, to reduce a person's sense of experiment, possibility, search for self, because then something really is being taken from you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so really the last question I have for you, it has to do with this individual pursuit, but also as a parent.
Yeah.
What does that look like? You've got 2 boys?
Yes. Yeah.
So I've got 3 little ones of my own, and it's been an interesting experience for me, just kind of trying to figure out how to act as that guide for them, how to act as a parent,
right?
And, guide them through something that I feel should be so personal, without ingraining anything in their mindsets, I guess.
Well, I have learned at this point something in my guts that we're always told, but that I didn't really have a feeling for until I reached a certain age as a parent. And that is that it's going to sound so obvious, but when you realize the truth of it, it hits you with the force of a hurricane, that we just teach by example. And no matter what we say, they really don't care. What they imbibe is example. And so, for instance, I've struggled with anger issues in my life. And I think finally, at the age of 54, after a lifetime of struggle, I've made some progress. My children are adolescents. And one of my deepest regrets, and I'm writing about this in a forthcoming book, one of my deepest regrets is that in demonstrating anger in the household when my kids were younger, it communicates to them that that's a valid way of behaving in the world. And it simply does not matter what I read to them, what I teach them verbally. They're picking up that that is a perfectly reasonable, adequate, acceptable way of being in the world, just as I picked it up from my father. You know, my father was angry all the time. He had a lot of problems. I don't blame him. But as a 4-year-old child, I looked at that and I thought, that's how adults are. That's normal. That's perfectly okay. And I think that must be one of the reasons why these traits get visited in generation after generation.
Yeah.
I have also found that my children will sometimes make fun of my spiritual commitments, but then they echo them. Like, you know, for example, on the covers of books by Neville Goddard, the ones that Neville published during his own life, he would show a tree with an all-seeing eye and a heart on it. And one of my kids was away out west, and he sent me some drawings, and he's never expressed any overt interest in Neville, but there were trees with eyes on them. So, you know, it's interesting. You know, a kid will take in all this stuff and decide his or her own search and path. But it took me a long time to learn how high the stakes are in terms of children imbibing our behavior. I mean, that's the only thing we teach, whether we like it or not. And I've had to come to grips with that. Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's heavy, you know, and what can we do? I mean, what can we do? You know, it's like we are flawed human beings. We're under pressure. We have, you know, chronic problems ourselves. You know, I mean, we were talking at the beginning of this exchange about depression or anxiety. I think these things are as ingrained in us as a bodily organ. And it's tough, you know, it's tough. But I do think children also must see if a parent or a guardian is making the effort to cope, you know, that's a lesson as well. I mean, let's say somebody has a problem with booze or drugs. If they're really making the effort to cope with that, go to their meetings, whatever it is they need to do to deal with that, the kid also sees that and learns from that. You know, they see this, you know, people cope. We don't just accept problems. We don't just say, oh, well, so what, you know, crack open another beer or whatever it is. You know, it's like, if that's a problem, see the parent cope, you know, and that must be instructive as well.
Dang. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. Well, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. Most of what we've been talking about has been from the Miracle Habits.
Yeah.
So that hardcover is coming out on the 27th?
The 27th. My publisher just sent me 3 copies at home on the Lower East Side where I live, and they got stolen. So I told him, you know, there's some thief out there whose life will be turned around upon reading the Miracle Habits. Maybe he'll write to me, or I'll see him on the street in my neighborhood, and he'll be like, wow, this was it, man. So I hope whoever stole the book gets a lot out of it. I can't imagine the resale value on the street is very high. So I'm still waiting for my copies, but maybe there'll be, you know, a thief on the Lower East Side of New York who's like, man, this has opened up doors for me. So let's hope, you know.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's awesome, man. Well, so the book is already out, right?
The book is out in digital. It's coming out in hardcover on August 27th, just a few days from now. And it will also be out in audio very soon. I've recorded the audio, and the buy button for that will be going up soon. The only reason for the delays is just that the printing plans and the studios and everybody has been delayed by COVID. So, you know, the Kindle worked out just fine, but the studio where we record things in New Jersey was closed because of COVID, so that prompted a delay. The printing plants in Virginia that print the book have had their issues with COVID, so that prompted a delay. So everything got a little uneven, but it's all out there. And the buy button is up for Kindle immediately, for the hardcover, and soon for the audio, which I recorded.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for doing this with me.
Pleasure, man. Pleasure.
Where can people find you?
They can go to my website, mitchhorowitz.com. There's lots of lectures and other things up there that are linked. And they can follow me, of course, on Twitter at Mitch Horowitz, and on Instagram at Mitch Horowitz23. And I'm very active there.
And that was my interview with Mitch Horowitz. He has since released several other books, so please go check those out on his website, mitchhorowitz.com. And I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. So, to the other ex-evangelicals in the room, I want to give you a trigger warning. I'm about to read a piece of scripture from 1 Timothy 4:1. Now the Spirit expressly says that in later times, some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and the teachings of demons. To all the ex-evangelicals, ex-Christians, and proudly unlabeled, we are doing the will of the God of the Bible. It has been ordained that we leave His church and devote ourselves to deceitful spirits and the teachings of demons. So, let's live in the darkness, where respect, consent, pride, and reason are virtues. Let's seek true justice for ourselves and those whose voices remain unheard, all while taking responsibility for our words and actions instead of pawning them off on a deific megalomaniac. Let logic and science be our guide as we seek to understand the world around us and make it a better place for ourselves and future generations, for such is the will of God. We are of our father, the devil, and of this world. We are divine, we are powerful, we're whatever the fuck we want to be. These are the teachings of our demons. Now go forth into the world and do what thou wilt.
Salvation in hell. There's no Savior in hell. There's no Bible in hell. There's no blood in hell. Whatever goes to hell stays in hell. Hell is a place, therefore, that awaits you. There's just one name that can keep you out of hell, and it's the name of Jesus. Coming after everything you hold dear. Panic, panic, we're coming after your soul.